Welcome to the Libertarian Institute Odyssey and YouTube channel. My name is Keith Knight. I'm managing editor at the Libertarian Institute. Today we have a roundtable. We're going to each pick 3 stories, topics, or ideas that we think are really valuable. Starting with Sheldon Richman, I'm going to unmute you. Give me one of your stories. Summarize it in about 3 minutes for us.
Sure. Yeah, I came up with 3, so let me pick one. Earlier this month, the COP27 UN conference on global, or whatever they call it, climate change these days, climate emergency, ended after 12 days in the lovely resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where about 45,000 people gathered, many of whom I'm sure flew in private planes to get there, to bemoan the fact that the Earth will come, all life on Earth will come to an end because of climate change. Because climate change, the climate never changed before human beings started industrializing. They didn't really do anything, which is a good thing. Let's be thankful for small, mercies. But they did. The big announcement was they decided to come up with a new fund for reparations for the developing world because of all the damage inflicted on the developing world by the West. Now they don't even have any mechanics for this thing. Like I said, thank goodness they're mostly hot air, ironically, and not action. But they came up for a roadmap for future decision making. How's that sound? That's a nice bureaucratic thing. The fallacy of all this, of course, is that fossil fuels and the CO2 that human beings have added to the atmosphere, which isn't actually that much really, it has bestowed untold, unmeasurable blessings on everyone. And the problem with the developing world is they haven't been allowed to get rich, both because of the Western restrictions and their own homegrown kleptocrats. So now we're just going to give them a whole bunch of more foreign aid in the name of reparations, when in fact there's only been about a 1 degree increase in however they calculate global average temperature since 1800, at the beginning of the industrial age, roughly, which means we hadn't even started coming out of the little ice age yet. So yes, there's been warming because the ice age began. The little ice age began to end. Meanwhile, they're saying if we add another ½ degree by the end of the century, life is over. So they want to totally restrict the use of fossil fuels, which will condemn billions of people in the developing world to starvation, to cold, to heat, because they won't have air conditioning, they won't have modern industry, to starvation, to thirst and drought. It's total disaster. And we need, as free market people, as individualists, and as advocates of individual liberty, we need to just say, this is a big scam, and we should put a stop to it if we can.
Mr. Bovard, what is the first story you have for us?
Let's see. The first story, what would be my first story? I could talk about student loans. The Biden just extended the student loan the repayment moratorium. It's a complete sham. It's basically a bailout for lawyers and doctors. And it's a great example of how he's turning college graduates into a permanent Democratic supporting class, because there was no rationale to cut off, to stop the loan repayments for everybody, which he's done. He's extended that for 6 months. This is part of his effort to get help Warnock get reelected to the Senate. And it's a lot of liberal Democrats have come out against this. The Washington Post editorial page, Larry Summers. It's typical of his scam on what he did with the attempt to forgive the student loans, which should have been one of the biggest outrages around. But you get all these people clamoring for handouts, and it's fun to see what they say on Twitter, because it's almost like a parody of responsible political rhetoric.
Tommy Salmons, what do you have for us? This retirement stock plans from MarketWatch. What is this about?
Oh man, you went straight to the one I wanted to pull up too. All right. So Sheldon was talking about climate change in COP27. And so what happened was when Trump came into office, he signed an executive order saying that 401k plans or financial institutes that control 401k plans cannot take into effect ESG standards um, when taking your money and putting it into stocks and bonds. What Biden did is he came in and he immediately reversed that. And so now you have the potential of these financial institutions going against fiduciary responsibilities and investing money into 401k plans that are not going to pay back to the 401k recipients and those investors, because what's going to happen is they're going to take into consideration the ESG metrics. So and ESG is something that I am just obsessed with. I've been reading up on this and covering this for a couple of years now. And so this had to be one of the topics I pulled in. What basically you're looking at are people that have invested 20, 30 years worth of retirement income into the market are having their investments rated by these ESG metrics. How good is it for the environment? Is it friendly with social justice? Is it friendly with corporate governance? And as they make these decisions, they score these people, and they're putting pressure on these people to move their money into green or woke investment strategies at the risk of their financial well-being at retirement.
Excellent stuff. My first topic came from a very good book called Why It's Okay to Want to Be Rich by Jason Brennan. He's so good because he's able to summarize these great thinkers in such effective ways. On page 170, discussing the concept of inequality from an economic perspective, he says, Hayek would say that the reason we're richer now than we were in the past is, of course, not because we have more resources. If anything, we have fewer. Instead, it's because we are more knowledgeable about how best to employ existing resources. But typically, when we learn how to make something new, such as a cellular phone, it is very expensive to produce it on a per unit basis. The rich buy the first units, get all of the benefits at first, but then also pay all of the upfront costs. They thereby pay for the basic infrastructure that makes it available for all. The rich pay for experimentation and innovation and fund entrepreneurs in finding ways to market to the poor, though this is not their intention of the rich. The reason wealthy countries today can provide what used to be luxuries, TVs, electricity, flush toilets, for all, is because in the past, those countries allowed such goods to be provided for just a few rather than prohibited because not all can have them. There is not just a moral, but also an economic reason that we should not accept things like egalitarianism when it comes to wealth redistribution. There's no reason to constantly vilify people based on anything arbitrary, rich versus poor, or American versus Russian. The only thing we should be dividing on is, are people acting peacefully or are they acting violently? Second story, Sheldon Richmond, what do you have for us?
Well, I did an article last Friday at the Institute, my weekly article, TGIF, The Goal is Freedom, on the FTX bankruptcy, collapse, and allegations of fraud around it. FTX is a cryptocurrency exchange, and I wanted to say something about it from, as I described it, the 30,000-foot level. I am no expert whatever on cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin. I have a layman's familiarity with it. But I think things needed to be said about the what's going to inevitably be the government reaction to FTX's bankruptcy and the allegations that will be brought, and charges I assume will be brought against one of its founders, Sam Bankman-Fried, who's being vilified. And I'm not saying he shouldn't be vilified. I'm not taking his side at all. I just wanted to look at it I wanted to abstract from the particulars. Essentially, this is not really about cryptocurrency. Now, a lot of people have it in for cryptocurrency because a lot of people have it in for our personal privacy and particularly financial privacy. There's a whole lot of people who hold power and who are friendly with people who hold power, who don't like the idea that we can do financial stuff outside of the view of the government and the knowledge of the government. And those, obviously, those people are not just people doing bad things. There are plenty of people who want financial privacy and other kinds of privacy who are doing perfectly good things. It's just a principle, and this is what comes with individual liberty and self-ownership. You have a right to control, to some extent, control knowledge about yourself, but the government doesn't have a right to pry on you. This was fraud. Fraud can occur with any product, any kind of investment. It's not specific to cryptocurrency. There's no reason to demonize cryptocurrency because someone in that field engaged in fraud. If the person did, I have to say alleged because of the obvious reasons. And fraud, guess what, is already illegal. It was illegal before this. So we don't need new laws. We need to investigate him and the people around him to see whether they misappropriated their customers' money and put it into saving one of his other companies. That's the allegation. And so, we certainly don't need new regulations, which people want to do. And of course, the Fed and others are talking about a new central bank cryptocurrency. They want to preempt the whole field and take it over and tell people, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And we want the last organization we should want to oversee any of this is the government, the federal government, which operates the biggest Ponzi scheme, I guess, in the world. It's called Social Security. Began as a Ponzi scheme. By the way, I don't think FTX was a Ponzi scheme. It had other problems, but I don't think it was that. A Ponzi scheme is where you promise big returns and you start to pay your early investors big returns, but not with true returns from investment, but from contributions made by later contributors. There's but then you're lying about that. You're just redistributing. And which is exactly what Social Security does. So we must beware the regulatory storm that's coming.
Mr. Bovard, I see a number of articles you have here. Vote buying surges in advance of Georgia runoff. Did the federal censor swing the 2020 election? What is the second topic you have for us today?
Well, let's go with that second article you mentioned. It was I was talking about there's a group called the Foundation for Freedom Online that's doing some great work. Mike Bentz, a former State Department official, is running it. He's had some superb reports detailing the federal grants to some of these so-called private entities that are carry out federal orders to browbeat social media companies into censoring specific individuals like Alex Berenson, and a lot of other messages and threads. And this has been, there were a lot of things that they targeted in 2020, targeting any kind of social media posts that raised doubts about mail-in ballots. And because of that, they were able to minimize controversy compared to what it would have been on issues like mail-in ballots, which were the tool that decided the 2020 presidential election. I'm not saying the election was stolen, but there are so many different taints and these details on the censorship by federally subsidized entities pressuring the social media companies. It smells to high heaven.
Tommy Salmons, what is the next story you have for us?
Let's stick with FTX. It seems like me and Sheldon are on the same page right now. So this FTX scandal is pretty interesting. And the Gray Zone just released an article a couple of days ago talking about how they've partnered with Ukraine. And what's interesting is there was a website set up called Aid for Ukraine where they were accepting cryptocurrencies. The cryptocurrencies were running through FTX, and FTX was paying out fiat to the government. And this was a website set up by the government. And so what happened was in April, the government recorded $60 million coming through Aid for Ukraine, the website. And the blockchain has continuously registered donations coming through since April of this year, but the website and the government has not announced any new donations. They still say the amount of money they've received through crypto donations through FTX up to date, going through the website Aid for Ukraine, is $60 million. But the blockchain has registered millions of dollars going through there to date. So it's like, what was this scandal all about? What was FTX doing other than funneling money to Democrats, other than funneling money to the Ukraine for bullets and bandages, as they said? Were they funneling money to autocrats within the government? Were the oligarchs getting richer through FTX and their connections to FTX? Because just before, a few days before FTX filed bankruptcy and this whole scandal blew up, the government gave up the website, handed it over to a private individual to run the website, and the government stepped out of the website and is no longer running Aid for Ukraine. So where is this money going? And this is something very worthwhile at looking at. Are they taking these people's money that are donating to Aid for Ukraine and funneling it into the corrupt government of Ukraine for the benefit of the oligarchs and of the government officials?
Amazing stuff. Very nice. Sam Harris had a very disappointing take some time ago. He said that in regards to the sovereign citizen movement, he called it the sovereign citizen lunatic cult in white society. So a sovereign citizen, for those who don't know, is someone who has basic standards for police. And if you haven't committed murder, rape, kidnapping, they're going to just consider you a random person trying to harass them, which there is nothing terrible with. However, Sam Harris has a tendency to be very passionate about people and things that don't have a lot of institutional power, now that he has sort of left the atheist thing behind him. So, since Mr. Harris is very against cults, and cults are bad, I would like to ask him whether or not the following organization sounds like a cult. Imagine there were an organization who claim the right to issue executive orders or laws that must be obeyed, and those who disobeyed would be put in a jail cell, and if they resisted the jail cell, they would be shot. Or what about a group that forces you to fund them, regardless of whether or not you value their services? I mean, wouldn't this be some sort of cult organization? Or like a bunch of kids had to get around a piece of cloth and pledge allegiance to an organization, or which compels children to be in the school for 12 years in the first place? Or what if there was an organization where you were heavily pressured to thank employees of this group for their service, even if that service involves murdering innocent people overseas? That sounds like the perfect example of a cult, which is the basic tenets of every government on the planet. So actually, it's Sam Harris who is the cult member, bashing people who dare to question the state's monopoly on violence. I would like Mr. Harris to reconsider his opinion. He's welcome on the Libertarian Institute podcast anytime. Sheldon Richmond, final story for us.
Final story. Donald Trump is, not that he ever left, but he's back. I mean, he's in the race, he says. And so I want to say something about that. I guess you can't say MAGA anymore. You have to say MAGA, because it's Make American Great Again, Again. That was the substance of his speech, his announcement speech. We had an article posted at the Libertarian Institute, I think came from the Ron Paul Institute, a repost, which went through a policy speech he gave, which I didn't bother to watch or read. Thought I had better things to do with my time, but I do trust the source that this information came from. And it's clear that Donald Trump has learned nothing. He's got nothing to say, I think, that's of interest to free market advocates or advocates of individual liberty. He's an industrial policy guy through and through, all the way down. Trade restrictions, even when he sounds good on matters of energy, you have to look at it through his lenses of industrial policy. He sees the United States as the relevant entity, and that's what he claims that he will be acting to benefit. Of course, we really know he's acting to benefit himself. My take on Trump is that he's first and foremost a Trump supremacist. He's an economic nationalist. He's also promising to intensify the drug war while to break up the drug gangs. Well, we all know here that you can't do both things. He's promising to build upon his border wall, which of course will mean eminent domain. We know he's a fan of eminent domain as a private entrepreneur. When he was building a casino and he was trying to take some little old lady's house for a parking lot. I forget whether he succeeded in that. He wants the federal government to have more and more to do with crime, which in the American system has traditionally been a state and local matter, although it's been usurped by the federal government for many years now, but he's all for that. And so it's just a bad news program. I'm not saying any other Republicans any better. I don't think so. I'm not sure about DeSantis and all these details, but I'd be very surprised. And of course, the Democrats are not going to be any good either. So I'm not pushing anybody one way or the other. I'm just saying, Trump, come on. Not only are you too old anyway, and you're too obnoxious, you have a terrible program.
Mr. Bovard, what is the final story you have for us?
I'm afraid I'm coming up blank on a third story. Actually, I just got an email from an editor. I've got a deadline fired just raised up under my ass, so I need to scoot out here.
No problem at all. You are dismissed, sir. Thank you so much for.
All right, thanks for having me.
Take care. Tommy Salmon's final story.
Yeah. All right. So the Federal Reserve has announced a 12-week program for CBDCs, and it's kind of convenient. I don't know. I don't believe in coincidence so much, but it's coincidental that this came up the same week that FTX has had this scandal, right? So if FTX has made the American people ask for anything, it's regulation on digital currencies.
Yeah.
And so you have a long-going, I say long-going, it's been going on for about 2 years. There's been a project that the Federal Reserve has been working on called Project Cedar, where they're working on central bank digital currencies. If you go and you listen to the way that, let me get it right. The Bank for International Settlements head, Augustin Carstens, talks about CBDC. He's talking about it being a way that the governments can control how you spend money. And so you're looking at another situation where they can take a social credit score, ESG metrics, and apply it to your availability to spend money. So instead of looking at the Canadian truckers where their entire bank account gets shut down and they can't access any money, or you look at Alex Jones where he can't use Stripe or Visa or MasterCard, or Donald Trump loses bank accounts, or Kanye West lose bank accounts for comments that they've made, you're looking at a situation where the banks are positioning themselves in such a way where they can control what you spend on, how you spend that money, what you spend it on. And so it won't shut down your ability to feed your family. It won't shut down your ability to get gas. But let's say you buy one too many guns, or you're investing in the wrong things, they can then limit the amount of money that you can spend. And so they're testing the CBDC right now, trying to figure out a way to make it work as they like inflate the fiat currency. To crash that currency, they'll introduce this digital dollar in order to control the way you spend your money.
My final story is actually a quote from a gentleman named Tom DeLorenzo. He is responding to the idea that, well, if you support the free market, you're kind of just a useful idiot for the 1%. What the statists, do is I care about the poor. DeLorenzo responds by saying, the late Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, became one of the wealthiest men in the world by figuring out how to cut the price of just about everything to the benefit of everyone, but especially of low-income consumers. That's one of the other virtues of the free market. It rewards people who can figure out how to supply products and services that might have originally only been affordable to the wealthy so cheaply that just about anyone can afford them today. Henry Ford became wealthy by producing a car cheaper and better in quality. John D. Rockefeller became wealthy by selling refined kerosene and other oil industry products cheaper and cheaper for decades. Cornelius Vanderbilt got his start in business by managing a steamship business on the Hudson River, in which the ride was eventually free, making money by selling food and drinks on board, and on and on. For their efforts, such men have been denigrated by the enemies of economic freedom, including various politicians, government bureaucrats, socialist ideologues, and academia and journalism as robber barons. Of course, they did not rob anyone. Unlike government, they could not force anyone to buy their products. They had to persuade people to buy them by making them cheaper and better. Other real world examples are Uber coming in and saving us from the taxi cab medallion industry. That was ridiculous. Apple products, things like Mac laptops, iPods, iPads, iPhones, much more affordable to the average person than a terrible supercomputer was in my parents' generation, or Amazon giving us access to tons of books and giving people with small businesses the ability to compete across state lines, whereas beforehand you had to have a store, and if people didn't come to your store, it was hard to sell to other people. So this, again, is a reason that we can still not just make the moral, but also the economic case for libertarianism, knowing that this is the general set of rules that a society should have if it wants the worst off among them to be the best. Thanks to everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute, Odyssey, YouTube, and Podcatcher. We will catch you next week. Sheldon, Tommy, and Mr. Bovard, thanks so much for your time.